wszystkie osoby, które...
Welcome to everyone who has registered to participate in our today's webinar. We are going to talk about something very important, but also very dynamic. We are going to talk about protests of women in Poland. You've seen a film about that. And I think the film showed the energy in the Polish streets for the last several months. We will also think where we are, where women are, not only in Poland, but also in other countries, what they have won and how their achievements are threatened. We have three amazing women, activists, philosophers, writers, women who inspire other people, change reality in their countries. There is Ailbe Smith, writer and activist from Ireland, one of the leaders of the Together for Yes campaign, who helped to remove the constitutional ban on abortion in Ireland. There is also Agata Czarnacka from Transform, political philosopher, writer and activist, feminist activist in Poland. There is also, yes, so welcome, hello. And there is also Laura Salome Canteros, Argentina, one of the amazing women in Argentina who won full rights for themselves in Argentina. So Laura, welcome to our webinar. Now, I will begin from a round of questions to the three special women who are with us. First, some technical remarks. There will be 2 questions for each speaker. Each one of you will have 5 minutes. Please stick to our time limit, so 5 minutes per speaker. If we are very disciplined, we'll have time for Q&A session later on. So 5 minutes per speaker. Please speak rather slowly, because we are being interpreted. There are 3 languages, so don't be too fast. We want to make work easier for our interpreters. All right, so my first question is to Ipe, because the history of women in Ireland, the history that you are part of, is extremely inspiring for women all over the world. Also for women in Poland, because women in Poland referred to Ireland and the Irish experience many times. If you look back at the history of Ireland, the last 50 years, it is hugely impressive, because initially it was the state where the church dictated people how they should live. It was very traditional, very conservative, and later on Ireland has become the country where LGBT people feel at home and women have full rights. How did you achieve that?
Thank you very much, Małgorzata. It's wonderful actually to be here, and I am just so completely overwhelmed by that brilliant film, and I see all of that electricity and energy and dynamism and the passion that is propelling women in Poland to win the rights that are so fundamental to us in our lives, that absolute freedom of our bodies, which we all fight for, whether it's in Ireland, in Poland, in Argentina, in Honduras, wherever it happens to be. Obviously, I can't possibly give you the history in 5 minutes, but what I can tell you is that I think in Ireland, we had a different situation than in Poland. We had never had the right to abortion. In fact, the right to abortion was absolutely prohibited by a referendum of the people in 1983, which obviously made it a criminal. It was a criminal offence. It was punishable by 14 years in jail. And that referendum, we resisted it, but we did not win. We lost. And over the years between 1983 and 2018, we had several other referendums coming back to ask us questions about abortion in 1992 and again in 2003. And finally, during the early 2000s, I think feminists, we became just quite simply fed up and decided that enough was enough. We were no longer going to react to what the anti-abortion people were doing. We became absolutely determined to seize the initiative and to say, we want to take out the clause in our constitution which prohibits abortion. So our job was to take something away, not to put something in, but to take out that obstacle to women's freedom, because every week, at least, every day, 12 women at least were traveling to the UK to have an abortion. And yet in Ireland, you had the Catholic Church, you had the people, you had the government, you had everybody saying, oh no, Ireland is pristine, clean. We don't have abortion in this country. We didn't have abortion because we exported the problem and we pretended that women didn't need abortion. So obviously we were very fed up and very angry and felt that the only way we were going to win this was to really bulldoze our way through the opposition. And that's why I love this film with the women out on the streets and men, their allies, helping them, because that is bulldozing your way through a system which actually wants to keep women oppressed and second rate and subordinate, and we simply won't have it. So we set out to develop a campaign following the very sad death of a young Indian woman who was refused an abortion in an Irish hospital when she was miscarrying. It was a miscarriage, she was miscarrying anyway. The hospital refused and she died. And in 2012, the population of Ireland was outraged by this death, not least, I think, because it had happened to a young woman who had come to work with us in our country. So we formed a coalition to fight a campaign. And I know my 5 minutes must be nearly up, but just to say that that was point number one, that we formed this platform, very broad, reaching out beyond ourselves as pro-choice feminist activists, because we couldn't win it on our own. So we tried to bring in as many different sectors as we could. And secondly, we changed the messaging, a bit like the women in Argentina. We didn't have a particularly pro-choice message. We said, this is about women's health. This is about women's well-being. This is fundamentally about women's rights. Because when we used pro-choice language, people just turned away. So we had to encourage and persuade and enable them to see that this was good for women, good for families, good for the country as a whole. And I think thirdly, we also needed to say to people, you do care, you know women matter to you, they matter to women, obviously. You have to feel that compassion for the situation in which women find themselves. So if you care about women, and if you care about equality, and if you care about justice, and if you care about freedom, you care about women and their freedom and their justice, so you will vote to remove this from the Constitution. And we got out on the streets, we roared and we shouted and we stamped our feet, and we simply would not keep quiet until such time as we got permission to have the referendum. And then we just quite simply in the last 10 seconds knew and determined that we were going to win. And we did win, and we won by a 2/3 majority in one of the biggest turnouts ever. So the people of Ireland, much to their surprise, they didn't think they were going to vote in favor of abortion, but they did, because they believed and understood that this was about fundamental freedoms and health and well-being, and the fact that, yes, women actually matter. Is that a...
Yes, you very much. I believe you've said very important things that sometimes communication strategies, which seem obvious to us like a slogan, that we are pro-choice, turn out to be inefficient. And then we have to look for other platforms, other slogans, other strategies, because we need to encourage other people to listen to us, to listen to our arguments. I have a question to Laura, which is a bit similar. Laura, the society in Argentina, just like in Poland, was permeated with stereotypes, certain notions imposed by the church. During an interview with Victoria de Saliero, she told me that 10 years ago, a woman who had an abortion in Argentina was called a murderess. How did you win? How did you change the awareness of people? How did you change this perception? In Argentina, we work on the concept that we call depenalization of abortion. So first of all, we want to have the right to abortion. That was the first thing. We wanted to win the right to abortion. It was number one for us. And we wanted to have a strategy that aimed at changing mentality. We wanted to remove the stigma and the burden on women, because women and other people who could get pregnant had the stigma over them. So we fight to place the issue of abortion on the political agenda, because it is a political topic, because it is important that women who suffered for so many years, because they had to have illegal abortions, clandestine abortions, had to have their situation changed. We wanted to improve the situation for women, because the history of women in our country was full of suffering. So the most important thing for us is that feminist movement can be turned into a cultural revolution. So we used all possible arguments. We tried to inform the society. We used all the arguments that we had at hand. So we talked about so many things. We wanted to give full information to the society. I believe it was the most important thing in changing our mentality. We also carry out lobbying in our parliament. We want to cooperate with all political forces. And we also do networking, feminist networking. We organize campaigns for the right to free, legal, safe abortion. We've been doing that for 15 years. We've been organizing our activities for the last 15 years. So, as I've said, networking, cooperation, we had doctors, lawyers with us, academics from universities. There were trade unionists cooperating with us, journalists. And that is how we've been trying to approach all the issues connected with illegal, safe, and free abortion. Because we know that in many provinces, especially far away from the capital city, the situation is very complex. And I think it was also an intergenerational fight, I would say, because young women participated in our campaigns, but they were also elderly women. So it brought generations together. So different generations, different disciplines, different professionals, feminists, of different professions participated in our fight. It was very significant for us. And I believe that is why our voice was heard in the Congress. The Congress realized, politicians had to realize, that the issue is of paramount importance. We used multiple strategies. We had this green handkerchief as a symbol. It was our logo. There was a song. There was also a song in the film we've just seen that said, "We are not alone, we are together. We are a crowd, there are many of us, and we fight together this fight. And we have to do it jointly, we have to do it together." Thank you very much. Now I have a question to Agata. I guess it is quite sad to be the third speaker voicing an opinion of a Polish activist. Well, I mean that Polish women do not have the right to safe, free, and legal abortion in Poland. So I'm quite sad, but what can we learn from the situation in recent months in Poland? We haven't achieved our final goal yet, but perhaps we can learn some lessons. Perhaps it has introduced some changes. How could you comment on that?
Thank you so much. Let me start by giving you some historical background. In Poland, abortion was accessible to women between 1953 and 1997, and then there was a law that was first adopted by the Polish Parliament about the terms and conditions of abortion, and that restricted strictly and very rigidly abortion options, leaving just 3 exceptions, including pregnancy that could pose a threat to women's health or life. The third case was a very serious deformation of the fetus that was not promising, and that amendment was cancelled or abolished by the Polish Parliament on the 22nd of October last year, and that was came into effect in January, and that resulted in mass protests throughout and during the pandemic. However, these attempts to introduce even stricter access to abortion, these attempts have been made earlier, when it turned out that Catholics were working on a legislative initiative, and the Prime Minister of Poland, Beata Szydło, she said that she would be supporting that initiative. And since then, we have been incessantly protesting on the case of abortion, and that caused increase in rapidly our awareness of what abortion is, and this is how access and we've been demanding access to abortion without any exception until week 12 for any pregnancies, and over a longer term for some pregnancies, more problematic pregnancies that were until that point allowed under then laws in Poland. And we can see a major change. Well, we must say that the socialism was pro-equality, pro-feminist as such, and the change of system brought a major change. And in Poland, to be a feminist, to be pro-abortion, that was equal or on par of to being a communist, a red. And I think that this is a major achievement to reverse that stigma in both cases, because I've just made myself familiar with some fantastic research that shows that there are so many very young people who support the left, and we can see deconstruction of the left, and then there are so many people who have started to support our cause. I've been active since 2011 in that direction, to not only regarding the ban of these restrictions, but to have abortion available without any restrictions. We understand that we are not even halfway through. We might be like, we may have walked like 30% of the road that you walked, but we can see that things change. Like, I talked to Polish women, and I no longer hear that they've never believed or noticed that they were discriminated. The first barrier was that Polish women did not see themselves as persons oppressed by the system. They weren't perceiving themselves as persons in being in more difficult life situation, although many surveys were showing that Polish women had it very difficult because of pay gaps, because of responsibilities and duties at home. Plus, there was this hypocrisy regarding abortion. Richer women, more affluent women, could go abroad to have abortion, or they could afford a legal abortion in cities, and real tragedies were happening in case of poor women who tried abortion in the underground in poor sanitary conditions. Well, you have 30 seconds, I'm sorry. And the third gain, or what we want during the protest, is to lifting the hinges in our knees that made us knee or bow to priests. We no longer have it. That happened overnight. So it seems that the taboo, social taboo of not criticizing the Catholic Church, of restraining from criticizing the church, that is almost gone. And we can see, we don't know when old system is about to go, it fights. And we can see that Law and Justice, our ruling party at this moment, is trying heavily to implement these solutions which are about to be gone. I think we'll have the opportunity to talk more about Poland during the second round of questions. So let us now go back to Ireland. And so my question to our Irish panelists is about challenges that women in Ireland are facing right now. I've talked to many women from countries where obviously there are no issues with women's rights. These women keep repeating that we must stand ready and prepared to fight, because whatever we want, whatever we have, that could be taken away from us. So what about women in Ireland? Do they have reasons to fear something?
Well, first of all, I think it's absolutely right that you can never take what you have achieved for granted. And I mean, I think that's very clear in Poland, but it is a problem everywhere. I mean, I think in Ireland, if I just say something briefly to begin with about our abortion law, I mean, as in so many other countries, first of all, we have a law on abortion, and it is not so much a law which is about permitting abortion, it's really a law which is about limiting and restricting abortion. So I think the first point to be made is certainly I and many others would like a situation where we do not have law governing abortion. Abortion is a procedure which should occur within our health services and indeed increasingly can happen at home with the use of telemedicine and so on. We do not need a law and we do not want a law, because a law is about controlling, it is about limiting, and it is about restricting. And the only country in the world that I know of that has no law on abortion is Canada. And while access is by no means perfect in Canada, it is certainly a situation where at least there is not legal control. And secondly, we have very limited abortion anyway, only up to the 12th week. And after that, it is extremely limited indeed. And women still have to travel to Britain. So there are very many women who fear that they won't be able to get an abortion in Ireland and who do travel. I think the second broader point is that within our abortion law, but it is true right across the board, what we discover all of the time is that women who are most marginalized, most disadvantaged, who have least income, least access to education, least access to social supports, are carrying the burden and the brunt of inequalities right across our society. And that is true in relation to abortion and reproductive rights, but it is also true in right across the board of human rights. The third point I would make is that during the pandemic, and obviously as in Poland, we are still in very severe lockdown in Ireland and our numbers are very high. But what we found is that there has been this massive upsurge in violence against women, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, which has risen by something between 40 and 50%. And that is a figure which is echoed and mirrored globally. So I think that even while everybody has known about domestic violence since the 1970s, since certainly I was active at the beginning of the women's movement in the 1970s, and we named domestic violence, but people have been able to look away. They've been able to say, oh, well, you know, it's being dealt with. Now, COVID has revealed there is nowhere to hide. It is absolutely appalling. It is decimating women's lives right across the world. And I think that we do need a global struggle and determination to absolutely root out men's violence against women. It absolutely has to stop. And the third dimension, I think, is that, again, if I think about the pandemic, there is absolutely no doubt that whatever our government in Ireland or governments elsewhere say, there is going to be a period of austerity which will follow the transition period of the pandemic. And I am extremely fearful that women's jobs, women's livelihoods, women's access to training, women's access to education, it's as if women have been sent back to the 1950s during the pandemic. We're the ones who have to look after the kids. We're the ones who have to do the shopping and the cooking. We're the ones who are looking after older people. That is just right. It's not just in Ireland. It's absolutely everywhere. And men are willing to work with us, but they're not actually doing it. And that simply has to change. We have to safeguard women's jobs. We have to create new jobs for women. Women's unemployment is much higher than men's, and potential job loss. Retail has gone, shops and all that kind of thing. Tourism has gone, hospitality is gone, all of those spaces in which women work. And lastly, I will say, who are the people who actually have been saving us and looking after us and taking care of us throughout the pandemic? It is women in Ireland. 80% of frontline health workers are women, and they are, apart from doctors, they are horrendously badly paid. That has to change. So there is a huge amount of work for us to do as women, even when you live under a government which says women have equality. No, we do not, and we will fight until we do.
I thank you very much for these words It's very inspiring, but also very stimulating. So we don't want to rest on our laurels and believe that grass is so green in Western European countries. Even if we win a battle, there is still a long way to go to achieve full freedom. So we're moving to Latin America, Laura. We all know that women have huge enemies. We know that there are extreme righteous organizations related to that type of Christianity who also have links with the conservative Catholics in Poland, and they operate across the world to promote the traditional family pattern and undermine women's rights. And they have huge money to support themselves and thousands of employees. And our grassroots movements, can they oppose these organizations that have huge budgets and are determined to fight for these rights?
En la resistencia, en la conquista.
Right. When we talk about resistance, when we talk about fighting for our rights, we are aware that we have to be well organized. I was quite moved while watching the film because I could see so much joy in Polish streets. Despite the difficult situation, we still feel joy. And we are aware that if we want to have access to full rights, we have to oppose certain forces. I'm talking about the whole Latin America, Caribbeans, because in Argentina we have a church hierarchy. It is very powerful. Also, during dictatorship, it was very powerful. Till today, many wounds were not healed. And as for our resistance towards conservative authorities, we need to understand how the authorities operate. I think we understood it well, and thanks to that, we could organize ourselves and we could resist. Now, additionally, the Pope is Argentinian, so we need to realize that we need to be well organized. We need to understand how authorities work, how power works, and we need to be well organized. And we need to have a right response to the authorities. There are countries in our region of the world where the situation is very difficult, where governments can take a step back. And I'm thinking now about Latin America and the Caribbean, Central America. In many countries, women are imprisoned for 30 years sometimes because they miscarried. They were imprisoned because they miscarried, and they remain in prison for years. So they can't decide about themselves. They can't decide about their lives. So the most important for me is to be well organized, and we need to have a deep understanding of who our opponents are, how they operate, who are people in the parliament, who are decision makers. In Argentina, we have managed to succeed. It opens up some other paths for us, or some paths in other regions, because we have certain experiences. We have the experience of success, so we know how to operate in the streets and how to resist. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now, let me go back to Poland once again. because I believe what you have said, this good organization looking for new forms of protests, it is the stage which is very important for us feminists in Poland, because we have protested, we've been very persistent, we've been very courageous, we took the streets, even though the police forces were sent against us, even when the police pepper sprayed one of our left-wing members of the Polish parliament. Many people were taken to police stations, but we took back the streets. It was heroic, it was beautiful, but unfortunately, the government did not decide to talk to us. So I guess looking for various forms of protests is absolutely necessary for us. Agata, how would you comment on that? I think that 3 members of the Polish parliament were pepper sprayed, 3 women, 3 MPs with blonde hair. So it was a very similar profile of a person who was pepper sprayed. So they were as if selected by the policemen to be attacked. So they chose delicate blonde women, and the attack with pepper spray was very painful for them. I don't know what they wanted to achieve. They didn't achieve their targets, I would say. I mean, the police, because, well, they did not discourage us against protests. I am very glad that you have said, well, feminist movement and women's movement in Poland are not the same. That's what I wanted to say. Since 1989 and even before, there were women's organizations which were functioning in the national arena as well as ombudsmen of feminism. But what happened in 2016 and later on is women's movement, not necessarily feminist movement. It is moving towards feminism, but it is not fully feminist yet. At the beginning, there was a problem. There were masses of protesters. Some of them were connected with the Committee of Defense of Democracy. They were mostly for compromise in abortion, so compromise from 1993. So these were women's protests, not necessarily feminist protests, because women's protests is a broader category. They have a specific nature, I would say, because they focused on morality, the ethical side, mentality. It was about processing our mentality and transforming our mentality. They seemed political, but actually postulates were not very political in a traditional sense. They were not really adequate when you see our political practice. It was actually happening in the feminist movement, because the feminist movement has been lobbying, has been proposing some legal tools in combating violence, family violence, in some solutions in the labor code. I read the labor code quite recently, the Polish labor code. I have to admit that we have a great labor law, actually, when you think about preventing discrimination. For example, the definition of mobbing is great, at least on paper, very rarely applied in practice, but great in paper. The next stage should be, well, like uniting women's movement and feminist movement, because there is this burden that feminists are know-it-alls, are elites. I was there. I mean, I was the intermediary between the women's movement and feminist movement, with which I've been for years. It was a very difficult role of go-between these two sides, women and feminists. I would like to see more people like me. I would like more people taking advantage of certain achievements of feminism, so that these achievements can be used by all the women. I'm very grateful when I see that there is a certain turn to the left towards equality policy, and I'm very glad of that. All right, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. Now, I guess it's time for questions, for Q&A. So it is Q&A from our participants. Maybe there will be a discussion between the three speakers as well. So who would like to ask a question to one of the speakers? You can do it via the chat. You can raise your hand and I will allow you to speak up simply. You may have a moment to think it over because maybe there are some volunteers with questions. And in the meantime, I will ask an additional question because Agata, what you said towards the end, it was something I wanted to emphasize in our discussion. The feminist movement, the women's movement cannot exist without a broader foundation, the foundation of equality, without looking at the system in which we live, because the system generates inequality between women and men, and inequalities in every other sphere. In a moment, I would like to ask a question about that, but I guess we have a volunteer with a question from our participants, so perhaps we will let Jolanta to ask the question or provide us with information about the events of the 8th of March in Lithuania.
Hello, everybody. I just wanted to share a few words of our support to our sisters in Poland. Then on 8th of March, we are planning, it's because of course of the very strict quarantine in Lithuania. It's not very much what we can do because every year we'd have a march, like with quite many people would join in. So this year, what we're doing is we decided to take the song of Bella Ciao that's been sung in Poland on the streets a lot and translated it, well, wrote really new words in Lithuanian, but of course, the first 4 verses we sing in Polish. And we think about it, we extend our hand of support to our sisters in Poland. And we asked many people to sing this in and make video recordings and send it to us. And we actually put it on a website on Reproductive Strike Facebook group. I could, if I could share a screen just for a second and play a beginning of one of the songs, but I don't know if I can actually share a screen here. No problem, not on a webinar. But okay, I'll just write.
Yeah, it's okay if you go to the green on the bottom.
Sorry, if I go where?
On the bottom, screen share.
Yes, but all right, okay. Okay.
Yes, you have it. But we don't hear the song.
Okay, so yeah, so we just wanted to say that we're gonna do this performance in front of Presidential Palace and demand our government. So can I just finish? Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna demand our government to actually express the support to Polish women and actually to shame the Polish politicians. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
I thank you so much for this contribution, and I thank you for this song, although we couldn't hear it, but still, we very much appreciate the fact that you recorded it and you have it, and cheers, greetings. And then we have a question in the chat from Miguel, but this question is addressed to me, so I'll answer that later. But now I would like to give the floor to our three distinguished panelists. So let us go back to my first question. It was about women and other movements fighting for social justice. It's so how to build bridges, how to build agreements between women and other movements like employee defending movements, other social movements that fight for equal rights and are anti-discrimination.
Shall I answer that now? Okay, thank you, Małgorzata. In fact, you yourself spoke at a meeting we had in Dublin on, I think it was Monday night, where we have, it's an organization which we've set up to counter the development and the growth of the extreme right, the far right in Ireland. Until now, the far right forces have been, you know, very, very fragmented and reasonably quiet, but the pandemic has seen an increase in those forces. And what's really interesting, and thank you very much for coming and speaking, by the way, and telling us about Poland, but what I think is really interesting for us is that there are a lot of women, a lot of feminists involved in this organization. In fact, I think over half of the organizers in in this new platform are feminist and are very determined to ensure that feminist issues relevant to all women will actually be on the program, on the platform. So in fact, there were 3 women speakers and only 1 man. And that's very unusual with the far left, of which I'm a part in Ireland. It has been quite male dominated. And I don't think it's unusual. I think that this is a pattern that we find everywhere. But there has definitely been a rising of women to say, you know, the primary targets of the far right are women. For example, our reproductive rights, our roles domestically, and also, of course, lesbians and gay men and trans people. So we're very, very conscious that we have to counter the far right. And I think this is very encouraging because it is bringing women into that feminist arena who have previously fought on other kinds of platforms. And the second thing that's happening is that we have a lot of what we're noticing, and it really is only over the past year or so, a lot of diverse voices, so that women with disabilities, women of colour in Ireland, and various other groups, I can't go through them all, but there is huge pressure on the system for those voices to be heard, and for white, settled, able-bodied feminists to move over and to, you know, people like me to keep a bit more quiet, actually, and to make space for a much broader diversity of voices. So those voices which have really been very marginalized and very silenced, and are rising to the surface, and it is really kind of organic. And of course, a lot of those women are very feminist in their outlook, but haven't experience of working in feminist movement. So there's learning for everybody in these situations. I have to learn to keep quiet. I'm just using me as an example, but you know what I mean. But also, I think there is this sense of finding new ideas about how we can do our politics together. And I therefore feel really very, very, very hopeful. There's always been a division between feminists and the vast majority of women. I don't mind that so much. I don't expect every woman to be out there on the barricades. I want her to support us when we're out on the barricades and to come out when it really matters. But not everybody is going to be radical, and not everybody is even going to be political. I just want to make the numbers who are radical more, increase them, and have them more diverse. I never know if I've really quite answered your question.
Yes, you have. Thank you very much indeed. You absolutely have. And now I have the next question to Laura. It will be asked by Anna Grodzka, one of the participants. You've mentioned it is tough to be silent, but now I have to switch off my mic and Anna will ask her question personally to Laura. All right, welcome, good evening. It is a question to Laura. I guess to all the speakers. Would you say that the fight against conservative rights, the fight of women for the right to choose, is also the fight against rightist neoliberalism, which is an economic system which petrifies, which actually maintains the system of social inequality, the system of women's inequality? That's my question. Could you repeat the question? Because there was an echo and I guess it needs to be repeated. All right, once again. We have this fight of women with the system of rightist conservatism, undoubtedly. But as I see it, the system, the whole system, which is social and economic system in which we live, which is neoliberal economic system, also maintains inequality of women. It is present in Poland, in Argentina, all over the world. It also acts against the interests of women, against the rights of women. Would you share my opinion? Would you say you share my opinion? I had problem with the sound because I heard both the interpreter and the person asking the question in Polish. So there were these problems with the sound. So there was both. Yes, just a second, because there was a bit of a technical problem.
This question.
I can see this question in the chat. Is it okay if I read it out from the chat? Is it okay? Okay. All right. The question is, women have to resist rightist conservatism. There is no doubt about that. But would you say that we have also a problem with neoliberal ideology? Because I believe that neoliberalism maintains inequality for women. Would you agree with me? In 2015, I'd like to answer also this previous question. So let me combine it. In 2015, the women's movement, also feminist movement, because in Argentina, I wouldn't say there is this big difference between women's movement and feminist movement. So I would say it is combined in Argentina. I would say we operate together, we act together, we have meetings once a year. These are annual, yearly meetings of women and LGBT community members. And during these annual meetings, we try to come up with a certain consensus. We try to speak with one voice. So these meetings provide certain responses and answers. As for neoliberal authorities in Argentina, the feminist movement was the first which led to a strike. The strike, which was to resist neoliberal policies of the government. So we were the first who organized something like that. We fought for our rights, we fought for women's rights, but it also happened on a national level. So from our perspective, we wanted to show certain proposals, how we can combat inequalities, how we can fight against inequalities in all spheres of life. I think that since that point in time, since then, we managed to initiate a discussion within our feminist movement so that it became anti-capitalistic, anti-liberal, anti-racist, anti-communist. So it was a very important moment for us because our meetings are very big. So we simply bring together many people annually, and there was a lot of social support for that strike that I referred to. It was a very important moment for us. So we didn't only appear in the media, but our proposals appeared in politics, on the political agenda. One of them was a proposal to legitimize abortion, to make it legal. So the fact that we resisted neoliberal governments led to the situation that we were listened, and we came up with certain proposals for everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your response. Stay with us, Laura, for a second, because there is also a question about both Ireland and Argentina. So we may start with Argentina now. The question is, during the fight for reproductive rights, trans men were also mentioned because they can also get pregnant because they have a uterus very often. It's a question from our participant. So was it also taken into account? Yes, in Argentina, there is the law which is applied. It is about respect. Respect for all the genders and the right to perceive your gender as you wish, as you choose. So this gender policy is in place. And in 2012, we had this right. So even before the right to legal abortion, we had this right to acknowledge all the persons who can get pregnant to be considered people who should also have their rights. So transgender, non-binary persons. So yes, these persons are also included. I have a transgender colleague, I have a transgender friend. Unfortunately, she died, and she often said, I may not be able to get pregnant, but I have the right to create new history. So there were different voices. There were voices of non-binary people, and they were very relevant to us. They were taken into account. Thank you very much for your response. And the same question goes to Ireland, because it was both the question to a representative of Argentina and Ireland. So what about Ireland?
And the answer, the answer again is yes. In fact, you know, our law is specifically applicable to anyone, any person who can become pregnant, a woman or a trans person, non-binary person. That's absolutely accepted and has been for all along. In fact, we achieved really good actually transgender legislation in Ireland just after the big referendum we had on the right for lesbians and gay people to marry in 2015. That was in May, and in June of that year, our transgender legislation was passed and enacted by our parliament. So while the situation on the ground in terms of access to services for transgender people is not always good at all, and while there is absolutely work to be done attitudinally in terms of the legal rights and entitlements of trans people, there isn't a problem. And in fact, in some ways, our law has been seen as a leading law in Europe, which of course makes it all the more difficult when trans people on the ground can't actually get access to well-trained medical practitioners who understand their medical and health needs. But that's for a discussion for another day. Is it okay, Małgorzata, if I comment briefly in response to Anna's interesting question? Is that okay? Yeah, okay, just I'll be very, very brief on it. Just to say, and I completely understand why you're raising that question. And, you know, I would like to say that the movement I spoke about against the far right in Ireland is absolutely led by the radical left, by the socialist left, in Ireland. And the socialist radical left has been a very important part of our struggles with the socio-sexual issues that we've been dealing with over the past couple of years. But that doesn't mean that there isn't also an involvement and an engagement by feminist socialists, obviously, in combating neoliberalism, because Ireland suffered very badly after the crash. We were sanctioned, we were punished with great, with great strictness, great severity after the crash. So there has been a very highly developed critique of how neoliberalism and patriarchy, in fact, intertwine to create particular kinds of situations of oppression for women. But it is also true, though, and I'm sure this is true, this is the case elsewhere, that not all feminists are Marxist or socialist. So we all work together on our common issues, and there can be different analyses and critiques. But certainly in relation to quite a wide range of issues, violence, reproductive rights, also women's economic situation, there is interestingly quite a lot of agreement, and very, very strong agreement at the moment, that what we need to see is a complete restructuring of the economy, which actually puts people at the center, not profit. I belong myself to a political party which is called People Before Profit. And I've noticed again over the past year that there has been our membership is going up and up, because people understand the profit doesn't save your life. Absolutely not. It just helps some people to get richer. But that putting people at the center of your whole economic policy may actually work rather better, which is a kind of a new way, I think, of formulating a kind of socialism, really, which is really interesting and is bringing more people towards the left in a country where the politics are very centrist. Ireland is never very much to the right or very much to the left. So all of those of us who are on the radical left, I was struck when Agata was speaking, we're seen as we used to be seen as the devil, and now we're seen more as a salvation, perhaps, of the country. Who knows?
Małgorzata, could you please turn on your mic? Okay, now we hear you. Well, so I believe that the left movement, the lefts can rescue Ireland. They can help us, everyone here, to survive. So would you like to take the floor right now? Actually, that was my intention, to give you the floor. Actually, I must say that your question has left me perplexed. I do believe that this is not possible to achieve feminist postulates without different level of our politics, local, regional, global, becoming more accessible. Well, we shouldn't be looking at politics through the prism of nations or states, and that's my this is where I'm different from the leftist movement, and I don't think we can reconcile on that. But actually, it seems that the feminist movement in Poland has learned one thing very well. So it's us, now it's us, and later on it's you. Now you should help us with the economy, you should help us with rebuilding the country, and then we can take off of your rights. We could see it very well when the women's strike, which I was trying to define strikes slightly separately from the rest of the movement, has become like a mechanism, that didn't require any reflection from the former ruling party, like the liberals. They wouldn't even think about changing themselves so we could regain our rights, and it took us a lot of effort that eventually that our current present Polish opposition could finally utter that perhaps, well, that wouldn't be such a bad idea, that women could perhaps have some form of rights, perhaps we could offer that compromise. But we know already at this point in time that it would be like a abortion prescribed by a doctor. Well, and that is quite infuriating, actually, that we should go and see a psychiatrist or a doctor to get a prescription for that. But I have an issue with the left movement as well. Katarzyna Kotula is the only representative of the leftist movement that has made it to the lower house of the Polish parliament. And as for like purely blooded feminists, there are very few in the Polish parliament, and I know very well why the leftist movement has some issues with feminists, and I think that the leftist movement should start working on that. I mean, the leftist parliamentary club. Well, I'm very sorry, but I don't want us to start that again. To what I don't want us to fight for left oriented Poland, and then we can wait, and perhaps we'll get our rights back. It's never ended well. I would like women to have the power. They should be leftist politicians, and they should be aware of mechanisms that we identify as feminists. requests and rights. This is very important, in my opinion, that the public opinion can hear it. And I'm going to work on that and support it. And I think this is the job now for the feminist movement. It is about disseminating and promoting that massive knowledge that we have. Agata, thank you so much. I think you addressed this very interesting concept. It's often said that women's movements, women have to struggle with different forms of oppression and inequalities, because only after we have the radical transformation of the society, then women's rights can be taken care of. But unfortunately, we know from our Polish experience that we've never achieved that full social transformation, and we never secured women's rights. Don't forget that women's oppression is happening right now, and that is something that has an impact on everything. Our children can see, and our children believe that this is how the world is run. So I believe that once we do this step, make this step now, then it will be easier for us to fight about every other type of equality. And then we have a question to Miguel. Bear with us, Agata, because this is a great question about Poland, and we can both try and answer that. Miguel is asking us the following. The position of the extreme conservative Polish government is obvious, and are there any political parties, leftist parties, that express its true will to change that politics? Well, I think that movement towards uniting the leftist parties in Poland, that was the platform for it was our pro-abortion movement, Let's Rescue Women. And here I have faith in the leftist movement when it comes to their pro-abortion declaration. Although I don't think they are aware that this is an omnipotent, but also a very heavy topic in terms of financing contraception, sexual education, care about women after giving birth, pregnancy care, and so on. So here, I'll be watching that very closely and monitoring it. But here, I have faith in the left, and also the central politicians. The politicians in the centers, they were very reluctant to give up power, and they're strongly against our ruling party, Law and Justice. And I think it happens only a few weeks ago. We witnessed a breakthrough, and the Civic Platform, the opposition party, and Adam Michnik, who is a great authority in the mass media. He's a very important figure of the democratic opposition of the previous system. And they somehow reconciled, they somehow agreed on the right to abortion, that it should be taken care of, but still in this patriarchal form of prescribed abortion. So let me answer this question too, since this question was addressed to me as well. I think that Poland is a good example of showing grassroots movements, and no one expected such movements to achieve so much. So we can see now politicians in the very center, or even right-wing politicians, they are now in the process of adjusting the political positions. I found it horrible and hard. It was at the very start of our uproar, when there were thousands of women walking the street, and still politicians from the center, from the political right, from the political center, they wouldn't say anything, or they would say, I'm all for the compromise. And the compromise would mean that law of 1993, which was extremely restrictive, and it wasn't a compromise at all. It was only after all that what happened, the politicians realized that they would soon have no young voters, they have no female voters, and they would face a failure and a disaster. And then they changed their mind. They started to speak about certain admission of abortion. But when it comes to the leftist movement, there are some good intentions or declared good intentions. There are some female politicians who are not involved in the feminist movements, but they spoke about women's rights. But I think that we need to make sure that their voices are heard and that they are not pushed aside in their own parties. Like nowadays in Poland, women have difficulties to have an appointment with a gynecologist. Women who do not live in big cities, they have a problem with that. Then another thing is another difficult issue is educating, sexual education or anti-discrimination education. There is a whole lot of issues that must be faced and must be challenged. Like young girls are taught about things that young girls or young women are supposed to do. And here we liaise with organizations that NGOs that support such initiatives, and we're going to support such initiatives, and we're going to monitor all that. So I don't see any new questions, but since we've been here for quite a while, I think it's time to start and wrap it up. So what would be your conclusions? What would be your message, your final message to us before we go perhaps out to the street to protest again?
Are you starting with me again? Well, my message to women in Poland is I think you're doing genuinely the most incredible and most inspiring job of pushing a completely reluctant government and indeed bringing the people with you to achieve the goal of the right to abortion, free, legal and safe for women. And I think you will keep going, and I think you have to keep going. And I think that you demonstrate so clearly what we know, and which is relevant actually to the last question, that grassroots mobilization can actually bring about massive change. It really does bring about change, and it can bring about change. And I know that it's exhausting to stay out there on the streets, and particularly under circumstances in Poland where there is police brutality and where there are the risks of prosecution and of perhaps even imprisonment. And we didn't have to face that in Ireland. So I am full of admiration for the bravery, for the courage of all those who get out there week after week after week after week and keep mobilizing. I have always felt that we bring about the big changes on the streets. I really do. I just think it's so important. And I think you radicalize and politicize so many people by doing that, who get that sense that it's not written in stone forever, that we can, as people, bring about change ourselves. So, I don't know what I can do. Women in Ireland, we want to support you. We can't protest outside the Polish embassy on International Women's Day because of our lockdown regulations, but we are going to be doing social media And we're trying to organize that at the moment to tweet, Instagram, Facebook, our support for you all. And I mean, I just want to say to Polish women, I love you. I think you're wonderful. And I want you. You will win. You will win. You really will. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. It was so inspiring. It was beautiful. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Haida Maria, I can see she wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you
Haida
very
Maria.
much. Yes, yes, I'm here. You hear me? Yes. Today we had a very not big, but for Corona seasons, a good demonstration from women in front of the Ministry of Women, because the women ministry today is not a women ministry. It's against the women. So I have the questions. There are many movements today from the women's all over the world, but how can be the main questions or the main demands what we can bring together? And I think there is one of the abortions, free for everywhere. There is the basic income, perhaps, to has a level of existential existence, and some questions about the racism, anti-Muslims or ever movements, what we can bind together to have a common sense for the next international day of movement of the 3rd of March. Perhaps we can think about what are the 1, 2, 3 demands we want together go further.
Thank you. And now perhaps Laura would like to sum up our meeting. So your message, maybe you have some inspirational message or maybe some suggestions. Laura. All right. Dear friends, colleagues, when we talk about legal, free, safe abortion, I'm always very much impressed. I'm sometimes overwhelmed. I feel like crying because it makes me very emotional. These are so important issues because the politics that we create is a lifelong project for many women, because we have decided we will lead the fight. It is our choice. These are our choices. We can't stop our fight. I'm aware of that. And it is very moving for me too. I think we have to move on. We have to create international events or events without borders so that we can have a common consensus, that we can organize great campaigns, international, not only national campaigns, but international campaigns to fight for the right for legal, free, and safe abortion. If we are together, we can win. We've seen it in Argentina, and we knew that. That's what we wanted to achieve was a revolution. It was burdensome to our authorities. It was a problem to our authorities. It was not symbolic. Acknowledging our rights was more than a symbol. It was a historic event. And our victory allowed us to show that we can dictate certain conditions, that we can create circumstances for further fight. That when we go to hospitals, to health centers, doctors will believe us, will trust us, will respect us, will provide us health care. We can achieve such goals only if we are united. So let me say all the best to all of you, my best wishes to all the women, especially women in Poland. You have to carry on, your fight in the streets, because in the streets we can achieve so much, we can win our rights, and abortion will be your right, it will be the right for women all over the world. So my dear friends, if we are organized and united, we'll achieve that. Thank you.
Kiedy dostałyśmy tak.
So with such words of comfort and support, it would be difficult or hard to give up and not to go take to the streets again. We know that the Polish government won't stop at what they've already taken away from us. We've already heard some voices that even that little that has been left of the abortion law is going to be erased. So we'll have to take to the streets again. Agata, could you please add on that? Well, and I believe that here, all of us in Ireland, in Argentina, and anywhere else in the world, we've been facing the same problem. Male governments do not really hear women's protests. It takes a lot of energy, noise, and decibels to be heard, and that shows how the civic attitude and approach of women is different from the same of men. And I hope that changes fast, and we no longer be so much divided because of our sex and gender, because that's the only way we can cross that bridge. I'm a bit sad because I can see what the extreme rightist Polish government is trying to do by limiting progressively Polish presence in the EU and EU's presence in Poland and ridicule it. And I can see a lack of understanding for democracy in Poland. Democracy is not only about voting once in 4 years. Democracy is about the public debate. Democracy is about renewal, exchange of political systems. It's about exchange between political movements. And Poland has been quite young. Poland was learning, and now we're paying the price for that. It's unbelievable from the democratic point of view that protests at such scale were so absurdly ignored by the government. I'm very much concerned that this is a bad omen in terms of the future democratic choices when it comes to Poland remaining in the EU. We all know that EU is not perfect, but this is the step in the right direction. It is going beyond the bipolar world and going towards that understanding that we're all in that together, that we have that solidarity beyond divisions. So I have this fear that now we're watching our march backwards, that we're walking backwards, that we're backing off such democratic solutions, and very soon our protests will be not only important for women, but also for everyone because of the very core of it. We hope that we can survive until the next elections. We hope that we can survive until the next elections and we can win over the extreme rightists and we can take over the power. And I can only second that by saying, keep your fingers crossed because the fight is still on. With all women in Poland have to keep up doing that. So I want to thank you very much for this evening of sharing our experiences, of uplifting our spirits, of showing to us that we're strong. And even if our enemies are powerful, the victory is ours. We'll never give up. Women who fight for their dignity, for their rightful place in the society, we never give up and we won't be conquered. And the only thing which I left to me is to ask you to check our website. We publish a lot about the women in Poland. There is a brochure about the situation of women in Poland. We cover protests and other issues faced by Polish women. So do check our website, do download our materials. So to close, I just want to give final thanks to all panelists, and the victory shall be ours.